When an astronaut had to trust instinct over data, the numbers said everything was fine. The screens were calm. The system agreed. The instinct did not. In space, data is authority. Sensors decide what is real. Readouts shape every decision. Every protocol, every checklist, every response framework is anchored to measurable input. But there are moments when the data tells only part of the story. Moments when the instruments report normalcy, while something beneath the surface shifts in a direction no sensor was designed to detect. To understand why this moment still matters today, we need to understand a quiet truth of exploration. Technology measures reality. Humans interpret it. The distinction sounds small, but it defines a boundary between automation and awareness. A sensor captures a value. A human captures context. And context is what transforms numbers into meaning. The astronaut monitored the systems as trained. Readings were stable. Trends acceptable. No thresholds crossed. No alarms triggered. The dashboard presented a picture of operational health, so complete that any observer would have concluded the mission was proceeding exactly as designed. And yet, something felt wrong. Not fear, not panic. A subtle mismatch between expectation and behavior. A pattern that didn't quite align, even though it technically made sense. The astronaut had watched these systems through hundreds of hours of operation. There was a rhythm to their behavior, a familiar cadence of readings that formed a signature as recognizable as a voice. This time, the signature was slightly different. Not wrong by any measurable standard, just different enough to produce a sensation that had no name in the engineering vocabulary. Training teaches trust in data, but it also teaches something harder. Pay attention when instinct disagrees. The astronaut hesitated, just long enough to notice the discomfort wasn't fading. That persistence was itself a signal. Momentary unease can be dismissed. Sustained unease demands investigation, even when a reason for it cannot be articulated. The astronaut understood that dismissing the feeling would be easy and possibly correct, but it would also eliminate the only warning available if the feeling happened to be right. This was the moment. Follow the numbers, or trust the feeling that had no graph to justify it. The astronaut reviewed the data again. Nothing alarming. Values sat comfortably inside limits. Any formal analysis would have ended there. A report generated from this data would have shown a system in perfect health. No deviation warranted investigation. No trend suggested concern. The numbers were not just acceptable, they were exemplary. But instinct persisted. It wasn't emotional. It was familiar, the kind of awareness built from repetition, from seeing systems behave thousands of times before. This time, the behavior felt slightly off. The astronaut could not point to a single reading and say this is the problem. The issue was not in any individual value. It was in the relationship between values, in the timing, in the way one reading followed another with rhythm that was almost right but not quite. It was a kind of discrepancy that lives below the resolution of instruments but above the threshold of experienced human perception. Ground control saw no issue. They trusted the numbers. And by protocol, they were right. The data flowing to Earth painted the same reassuring picture visible on board. From thousands of kilometers away, through the lens of telemetry alone, there was no reason to question the system's health. The ground team was operating exactly as they should, responding to what the data showed. That made the hesitation heavier. Trusting instinct meant questioning data without evidence. It meant slowing the mission based on something that couldn't be explained cleanly. It meant asking the ground team and the mission timeline to absorb a delay justified by nothing more than a feeling. In a culture built on precision and measurability, acting on instinct requires a different kind of courage than acting on alarms. Alarms provide justification. Instinct provides only conviction. The astronaut knew the risk. Acting on instinct could waste time and resources. Ignoring it could mean missing the only early warning available. Both paths carried cost. One cost was measurable and immediate. The other was uncertain and potentially catastrophic. The asymmetry of those costs was itself a form of data, though not the kind that appears on screens. This was the quiet conflict. Precision versus perception. The engineered world versus the experienced world. the dashboard versus the gut. Both were product of information, but they process that information through fundamentally different architectures. The sensors use circuits and calibration. The astronaut used years of accumulated pattern recognition, a biological system trained by repetition, to detect anomalies that fall outside the vocabulary of instrumentation. And the window to decide was closing. The astronaut chose to trust the discomfort, not dramatically, not as rebellion against data, as a pause, a deliberate slowing of momentum. The decision was framed not as a rejection of the numbers, but as a request for additional confirmation. By slowing down, the astronaut created space for the discrepancy, if it existed, to reveal itself. They adjusted the sequence, rechecked assumptions, ran an additional diagnostic, not strictly required. Time slipped, but control increased. The mission timeline absorbed a small delay, and the astronaut used that delay to look deeper, to watch the system with the kind of sustained attention that routine operations rarely allow. And then the discrepancy appeared. A subtle timing mismatch. A sensor reporting accurately, but slightly late. Individually harmless. Together, misleading. The data wasn't wrong. Each sensor was producing correct values. Each reading was within specification. But the latency in one sensor's reporting created a false synchronization with another, producing a composite picture that looked healthy but masked a developing imbalance. It was incomplete. Had the sequence continued, the system would have corrected itself too late. Not catastrophic, but enough to push margins into dangerous territory. The imbalance would have grown until it crossed a threshold, and by that point, the corrective action required would have been larger, more disruptive, and more resource-intensive than the simple adjustment that early detection allowed. Instinct had noticed what numbers hid. Ground control acknowledged the finding. The discovery validated the pause. Procedures were updated to account for the timing discrepancy. The mission continued, steadier than before. The ground team integrated the new understanding into their monitoring, and the sensor latency was flagged for review in post-mission analysis. This was the emotional peak. Not relief, but confirmation. That experience sometimes sees patterns before logic names them. The astronaut had been right, but the rightness was not the point. The point was that listening to the discomfort had been the correct response regardless of the outcome. If the diagnostic had found nothing, the delay would have been minor, and the caution would have been reasonable. The cost of checking was small. The cost of not checking was potentially severe. The astronaut didn't feel pride. They felt responsibility. Because trusting instinct is not about ignoring data. It's about listening when something doesn't fit yet. After the mission, the incident was documented as a minor correction, a small adjustment, no failure, no near miss. The official record captured the technical finding, but could not capture the human process that led to it. The moment of hesitation, the weight of choosing perception over precision, the quiet courage required to slow a mission on the strength of a feeling. None of that appeared in the report. But the lesson carried weight. Data remains essential. It is a foundation of survival in space. Without instrumentation, human perception alone would be catastrophically insufficient. But data is never the full picture. Sensors report conditions. Humans recognize meaning. The relationship between data and interpretation is not hierarchical. It is collaborative. Each informs the other, and the strongest decisions emerge when both are respected. This story matters because future missions will rely even more on automation, faster systems, smarter software, fewer people watching every detail. As automation increases, the temptation grows to trust instruments absolutely and to treat human instinct as noise rather than signal. But the lesson of this mission suggests the opposite. The more sophisticated the automation, the more valuable the human ability to sense what automation cannot. Instinct will still matter, not as intuition without discipline, but as experience noticing what rules cannot yet define. It is a product of years of observation compressed into a feeling, a biological computation that operates on patterns too subtle for current sensors to detect. Trusting instinct over data is not a rejection of science. It is the final layer of it. Because when exploration pushes beyond certainty, the first warning is rarely an alarm. It is a feeling that something doesn't belong. And listening to that feeling is sometimes the difference between control and consequence. Subscribe to join the journey.